Hi, welcome to our April webinar for Reuse Minnesota. My name is Jenny Kedward, the president of Reuse Minnesota, and I am so happy that we could get this webinar going with our special guest, Jeremy Kalin. Jeremy has the perfect trifecta of to help us out right now with his political past. He was a former representative with the Minnesota legislature. He is a lawyer, so he can interpret all of the legalese for us, and he has owned his own small business. And we know how valuable that is here at Reuse Minnesota, where reuse businesses are going to be on the front lines in trying to help us cope after many things open up, and we have a lot of spring cleaning donations to deal with. So thank you, Jeremy, for being here with us today. And if you want to ask any questions, you can put them in the chat function or the Q&A, and we'd be happy to work this out as a dialogue rather than just a presentation. So please ask away. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks so much, Jenny, for the introduction and the invitation from Reuse to help your members out, and good afternoon now that it is officially afternoon here on Thursday. Really pleased to join you all. This is a series of webinars that my law firm Avisen Legal is providing as part of our commitment to the public good in response to the global pandemic caused by the coronavirus. And so the slides I'll walk through here are for general information. Being a lawyer now, I have to, of course, include disclaimers all the time. That I am not providing legal advice, and even in the Q&A, we'll do our best to address general circumstances. But for specific legal advice, feel free to give me a shout at my phone number there, or send me an email, making ourselves available to help people get the first sense of the general direction that they should be going. And if you actually need some formal assistance, we can cross that path later. But our goal here is to, as a firm, really leverage our expertise to help you truly manage this chaos and make sense of it all. A little bit about Avisen Legal before I get into the broader scope. And my own background, as Jenny said, I served in the state legislature, as I'll share in a little bit. And the work that you all do at Reuse and as Reuse members is close to my heart, because I've been involved in deep sustainability in the circular economy for 2 decades, and ran a small business myself that helped facilitate financing for underserved markets in mostly renewable energy, energy efficiency, and a little bit of clean water, but always looking at how do we close loops and reuse our precious natural resource materials. I was a client actually of lawyers that founded Avisen 3 years ago, and have always had that sense of affinity, even when I wasn't practicing law, with the approach to the law as serving entrepreneurs, finding creative solutions as advisors as much as lawyers. And Avisen actually means advisor in Old French. So there are 10 of us. We're all mid to later career lawyers with a lot of experience in helping entrepreneurs, helping small businesses, helping nonprofits, with mobilizing capital to do public good, as well as all the life cycle parts of creating, launching new enterprises, facilitating investment, managing them for growth or for just general operations, and then even the sale or the wind down as case may be in some cases. So real soup to nuts, part of that entrepreneurial ecosystem. As Jenny mentioned, I was lucky enough to be elected to serve in the state legislature. This is literally the very first formal act I took back in, I think the day after my birthday, maybe in 2007. Served in Chisago County, represented Chisago County in the state house, and was very lucky to work on everything from elections policy to climate and clean energy finance, and ended up leading a national task force of Republicans and Democrats working on climate action for President Obama. So, got to do the fun things like welcome Air Force One to the MSP airport, but also got to work in the real nitty-gritty details and still serve as a senior advisor to the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators, a national bipartisan nonprofit that is kind of the back end, in some ways, the trade organization of environmental lawmakers around the country. And that's a real pleasure. And the circular economy continues to be a key topic that legislators ask us to help them find resources and creative solutions in all 50 states. So today I'm going to walk through, try to buzz through the agenda here in the next 25 to 30 minutes and leave plenty of time for questions. Want to really talk about what it means, what's the framework of these emergency orders, both federally and more importantly here in Minnesota. We'll talk about the small business assistance programs. PPP is the Paycheck Protection Program, as I'll talk through. Some disaster loans, a little bit of the state assistance that may be of interest to you all. And then the other resources, including tax implications, tax credits if you have to actually invoke and comply with the new Paid Sick Leave and Family Medical Leave Act provisions in the second of the 3 congressional responses thus far. And then if you happen to have some issues that come up around real estate and either as a landlord or more importantly as a tenant, kind of what we're seeing across the board there. So I always like to start with understanding what it means to have emergencies declared both federally and at the state level. I have some experience with this. I served on the public safety and transportation committees when the 35W bridge fell. Had some experience with whistleblowers around certification as emergency management and what didn't work well. And that has led me to spending the last 12, 13 years in and around the field of emergency preparedness. I actually helped, I led the project to update and rewrite the state's energy emergency plan for the Department of Commerce and the U.S. Department of Energy. And so, you know, I've really dived into what it means for us to be under an emergency. So as you know, the World Health Organization declared a global pandemic on March 11th from the coronavirus, with the infection as COVID-19 being the infection that comes to us with that name, to individuals who are then infected by the virus. The President of the United States declared a national emergency formally on March 13th under the National Emergencies Act. You may also have heard it called the Stafford Act, and of course the powers under the Constitution. The state executives all over the country, under our state constitutions and then state laws that the legislature enacts and the governors have signed in the past, have allowed for what in Minnesota is known as a peacetime emergency. And that peacetime emergency is a statutory defined, there are parameters that you have to meet in order to declare that emergency. Having declared the emergency, then there are executive actions that the governor can take. In some cases, he has to have the executive council extend the peacetime emergency. And that has actually happened now twice. In fact, Executive Order 20-35 extended that peacetime emergency for another 30 days. And it's worth reading if you really care about understanding that power. Why do I share all this? I'll go back to the stay-at-home orders in a second. Because the Congress and the legislatures under the Constitution typically are the only ones that have the power to do things like levy taxes, spend money, in the federal context, declare war. But Congress and the legislatures have actually transferred some of that authority under specific emergencies to executives under the theory that you don't want to wait if somebody attacks us, if there is a pandemic, or in the case of floods. We actually, in the late 2000s as a legislature, when I was there, changed the way we deal with disasters, with natural disasters, so that the legislature doesn't always need to be called back into special session for smaller instances, and the governor can invoke that authority. as you're starting to see with the protests in Michigan and elsewhere, and I understand there may be a protest at the governor's mansion today or tomorrow, asking for the stay-at-home orders and the kind of government shutdown, or the public shutdown, economy shutdown orders to be lifted, governors and executives like the president have to act very, very carefully to ensure that they are staying within the power designated by the Emergency Powers Acts, and that those actions are taken in response to that emergency or directly connected to that emergency. So there's a reason why those who are really frustrated and have a strong libertarian streak and feel like their civil liberties are being encroached on, why they're taking to the streets rather than going to the courts, because so far, all the actions I have seen are consistent with this discretion and a very clear connection to the information and the public health threat presented by the coronavirus. Courts can and have invalidated actions that might be taken, but of course you want to avoid having any part of your power struck down if you believe what you are doing is in the public interest. And so there's this real care to go down that road. I'm going to go back a second here and just, of course, talk about the stay-at-home order in Executive Order 20-20 in Minnesota that was then revised and extended in 20-33. So 20-33 is now the governing law for the duration of the stay-at-home order under the current peacetime emergency that has a longer duration or a bigger baseline. But the order itself is what is currently the governing law and has had no challenge in the courts generally. There was a little bit of action that the Supreme Court of Minnesota took to change or refine, I guess, how the courts were impacted by that executive order originally. But that is the rule of law right now about what is a critical sector, who can work. There have actually been a few misdemeanor charges that have been tickets that have been levied for those who've been violating the order, very, very few. But it is all under that broader confines of the emergency law. So obviously for reuse members, understanding what it means to be an essential service or a critical sector is really important. And the governor's office has been really open to understanding the on-the-ground implications of the choices that they've been forced to make, and have even set up dedicated email addresses and other intake for providing that input. And I believe that reuse leadership is participating in some of that conversation and urging either an expansion of what it means to be doing supplier for residences of critical supplies, essential supplies, for us to comply with staying at home, or to think about how do we, if and when we're able to start to loosen some of those restrictions, how do we do so with a great decluttering? I was literally going to ask what I should do with the piles of stuff that we are decluttering ourselves, and textiles need to be recycled, because we're doing the same thing. I do want to just point out, I'll come back to this in a couple of minutes on the tax filing, maybe in about 15 minutes, the tax filing deadlines. While the governor makes a lot of statements, the president makes even more statements, the president's cabinet members and key advisors certainly make lots of public statements and tweet a lot. It is literally the executive orders and acts of Congress that have the force of law. I'll just talk about one example. The Secretary of the Treasury announced a few weeks ago that yesterday, April 15th, was going to not only that the filing deadline was going to be pushed back, but actually now payments could be pushed back at the federal level till July 15th for all federal taxes. Well, for the entire day, that tweet on a Friday was not translated into official notice from the IRS. And so people were having to make plans for their tax preparation over the weekend for a bunch of reasons. And only by 3 or 4 o'clock did the IRS actually formally publish the press release even that was enough for us to rely on that statement, because those public statements are not enough. Agencies have to provide official guidance. I normally don't spend as much time on the emergency declaration background, but I know it's of great interest to reuse members. So thanks for your patience and letting me be a little more thorough there. Now I want to go through the roadmap of resources that we've identified and think that is the right kind of logic path. This is a very oversimplified decision tree, and disclaimer: you should work with your accountant or your lawyer or other professional to decide the right path for you. But in its infinite wisdom, its wisdom is actually fairly finite in Congress, but Congress has actually put together a very quick response package, not large enough, it turns out, as of a few minutes ago, which I'll share in a second. But the logic of dealing with this virus has been pretty cohesive from an economic response perspective. The second and third acts of Congress directly related to coronavirus. The second was the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And the second was the CARES Act, or the third, I guess, was the CARES Act. Really, the whole goal has been keep money in consumers' hands and keep people on payroll to the extent that they can. And to the extent that people are pushed onto unemployment, make sure the unemployment insurance benefits are sufficient, that we're not running people into the ground and causing economic crisis greater than this substantial downturn that we've already seen. So I believe you can see my mouse here. For SBA qualified businesses, typically 500 employees or smaller. There are other rules as well to comply, but if you are an SBA qualified business, you should be applying, I believe, for the SBA Economic Disaster Assistance Loan, which I'll walk through, and the $10,000 advance. That advance is basically a grant and is very easy to start the application process. Then if you've been shut down by the government or experienced a 50% loss of revenue, you could choose to pay employees still and receive the 50% employee retention tax credit. If you, even if you've not been shut down, or if you have been shut down, excuse me, and have had great losses or are still operating, you certainly should be applying for the Paycheck Protection Program. And I believe that there will be enough funds renewed by Congress or added by Congress soon to keep that program alive for all of us. And then we'll talk through the Emergency Paid Sick Leave and the Emergency Family Medical Leave Act mandates that were added in the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, as well as the tax credits that help cover that. If you do not choose the Paycheck Protection Program, also your payroll taxes for 2020 can be deferred until 2021 and 2022 on the FICA portion. So let's just go through the detail here real quick. So the SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loans are these direct loans to small businesses. The up to $25,000, there's no collateral required. Once you get above that, you do need to either provide a personal guarantee or sufficient collateral. These come directly from the SBA, and the first intake process is really simple. It's 3 really quick pages of a website. Nonprofit organizations are eligible for both the Paycheck Protection Program and the SBA loan. For some, this $10,000 forgivable advance that comes immediately after, or within 2 or 3 days, a wire transfer after your application is approved, that $10,000 grant can be really meaningful for some sole proprietors and smaller businesses. For others, it's, it helps a tiny little bit, but it's far less meaningful as a percentage of overall income. But these are long-term, low-interest loans, 30-year term loans. There's no prepayment penalty. There are no fees for applying. You can see that they're substantially lower than normal SBA rates, so 3 3/4 and 2 3/4% rates, and no payments owed for 12 months. You do have to declare that you've had a substantial economic injury. We've got no hard guidance from SBA about what that means, but 10% is understood to be not a truly substantial economic injury, 10% loss or reduction, but 25% or more is about the threshold, 25 to 30%. The SBA's advice and our advice is apply. You lose nothing but a few minutes to put together the application to make yourself eligible for the $10,000 immediate forgivable advance and the opportunity to take this loan. There are some limits on uses and what you can use the loan proceeds for, but again, talking with your accountant or lawyer, give me a shout. Happy to help you navigate that. And so that portal is actually online. I meant to have it up, but if you just Google SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loan for COVID-19, you'll be able to get the application. It really is a very quick application. So we've talked about the disaster loan. Let's now move to the more robust option, the Paycheck Protection Program. So the purpose of this $349 billion that was funded by Congress in the CARES Act is to keep people on payroll, to have companies keep paying employees. And if you do keep payroll, asterisk oversimplifying here, but largely if you keep people on payroll at the same levels that you've had either in 2019 or recently in 2020, you then will, if you keep that for 8 weeks, you will have that loan forgiven. Oversimplifying, but that's essentially it. So it's a forgivable loan, 2-year term on the loan at 1%. There's no guarantee or other collateral required, no fees, no prepayment penalties, payments are deferred, and you can use it for payroll as well as rent, utilities, interest on mortgage payments, etc. So it really is keep the lights on and keep payroll going. There has been such demand that the SBA actually ended up having to close their portal about an hour ago for new applications, maybe 2 hours ago. But Congress is absolutely aware of this challenge, both Republicans and Democrats. And the good news for a lot of reuse members is that not only will this money flow to banks, but it is very likely, I think the House, Speaker Pelosi, is demanding that some of these funds not just go to the Wells Fargos and US banks of the world, but also go to local lending institutions, CDFIs, community development finance institutions. But I do expect that additional funds will push through the pipeline. So you can borrow up to 2.5 times your monthly payroll costs, and you can spend those funds from February 15th to June 30th. So basically, consider it that you need to keep the lights on and need to keep payroll there. If you do keep payroll up, like I said, is 100% forgiven loan, and the loan is not considered income for tax purposes either. So really, there's very, very little reason not to pursue a PPP loan, including you can take an SBA Direct Economic Injury Disaster Loan and repay those funds from the Paycheck Protection Program loan. When I originally posted this slide or put this slide together for a different webinar a week ago, banks are really struggling to meet demand. They finally found their rhythm and built their systems in the course of days. Of course, just a couple days before the funds ran out for the first $349 billion. I do expect that that there'll be a lot of loans that were originally for which they were originally applied that the borrowers won't actually take them, and so maybe there'll be a few billion more opened up even before Congress acts. We are now seeing PPP funds getting dispersed, and I am quite optimistic that you all should be really strongly considering a PPP loan application if you have not already. And there's, even if you were get approved mid-May, this February 15th to June 30th potential coverage period for when for covering of the acceptable uses of the loan proceeds, that's not going to change. So the delay in availability of funds, while it is quite frustrating for business owners who have to make key decisions, the actual use of the proceeds won't change. So we covered the Paycheck Protection Program. Now let's talk about the alternative, which may be of interest to reuse members, the Employee Retention Tax Credit. So the purpose of this program, as I described, is to give funds to employers so that you can keep paying employees even if they have to shut down or experience that substantial more than 50% loss of revenue. It's a fully refundable tax credit to employers. If you're a sole proprietor or a single member LLC that takes just funds as a draw, you'll only be able to wipe out your credit, won't be able to get the refund, but all other employers can actually get advance payments from the IRS for that refund. So you get half of the qualifying wages you pay from middle of March to the end of the year, up to $5,000 for each employee. So if you have a lot of part-time employees, it may be quite worthwhile to look at the math and do the calculations on the Employee Retention Tax Credit. If you've been shut down by government order, including it should be 20-33 there, that complies. So reuse members, you are eligible for the Employee Retention Tax Credit. You can, like I said, you can reduce you first have to reduce your, if you take the $5,000 for each employee, you have to first use up to the $5,000 of potential payroll taxes that you would be owing. And then everything above that, beyond that, you can get refunded as a cash payment. And you just have to file that form 7200. That's a special new form from the IRS so that they can accelerate your payment. Obviously, you can't take Paycheck Protection and the loan and the payroll tax credit both. However, when we get to the paid sick leave and the Family Medical Leave Act tax credits, that you can combine that with the payroll tax credit. I think I just made a mistake, so I'm going to go back and correct something. If you are a sole proprietor, I believe you can take the Employee Retention Tax Credit. It's the paid sick leave and Family Medical Leave Act tax credits that you can't turn into refundable. So really worth looking at if you if the math works out for your employees, for you to receive the tax credit rather than go through the Paycheck Protection Program. So we've talked about both of the most robust options to continue to meet payroll for your employees. It's also worth considering, especially in the Reuse Minnesota case, that your employees may be better off on unemployment insurance. Because while unemployment insurance typically covers 40 to 50%, 45% at the state benefit here in Minnesota of their typical wages. So if they're making $20 an hour, that's, I should have chosen, if they're making $30,000 a year, $15 an hour, they will likely receive somewhere in the neighborhood of $7 an hour or $280 a week rather than $600 a week for their state benefit. But the CARES Act included pandemic unemployment insurance assistance that includes a $600 extra bump for everybody and an extension if they've run out. But let's say you laid people off in March or in April, your employees who've been laid off would get their state benefit plus another $600 federal supplement on top of that, and that is a fixed amount. So they may be better off, and you may be better off with that, going that route of helping them collect their unemployment insurance rather than pursuing the Employee Retention Tax Credit. The other thing to know is that MNsure has a special enrollment period that ends on April 21st. So I think that's Tuesday for folks who have been laid off and do not have insurance either through COBRA or continued offer of insurance that you may be providing on health insurance to those laid off employees. So absolutely worth considering that math, and I'm happy to walk through it with you or with your accountant. So one of the things that happened under the the FFCRA Act of Congress was the recognizing the health impacts of the coronavirus, particularly expanding the emergency paid sick leave and the Emergency Family Medical Leave Act mandates and adding tax credits there. Basically, all employers with fewer than 500 employees have this new mandate. You have to provide paid sick leave up to 80 hours for specific COVID-related absences, and I'll walk through them in a second. There are very, very few exceptions the Department of Labor has extended, so assume that you have to cover this, and they may have joined you the day before they got sick. It does not matter how long they've been your employee for you to have to pay that paid sick leave. So here are the 6 categories. The stay-at-home order counts as category 1, so indeed, most of your employees are going to be covered for the 2 weeks of paid sick leave. If they have been advised to self-quarantine or have symptoms of COVID-19 and are just seeking a diagnosis, they're also covered. And anyone who's caring for somebody who has become subject to a isolation order, either by government or medical folks, or has been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine, if you're caring for that person or caring for your child, if your schools are shut or childcare is unavailable, you also are covered. Don't worry about the condition 6, because I think largely everyone is covered by the emergency paid sick leave in Minnesota, unless they're a critical sector employee and are not sick. So the paid sick leave you have to provide is capped at, I should say, $511 a day. That doesn't mean you have to pay the $511, because you have to just pay their ordinary wages, I believe. But the maximum you may have to pay is $511 a day for the employees in those categories. Obviously, part-time employees get prorated leave, and we can talk about those details if you need to. But if employees are still working and they can telecommute, then they're not covered. You do not have to pay them. But you also can't force employees to first get their earned paid sick leave, vacation, or PTO before they access the emergency paid sick leave payments. Congress also extended the Family Medical Leave Act mandate to 12 weeks to anyone with a qualifying need. That means someone who's unable to work to care for a child or to care for a sick family member. And so because school has been closed and most childcare is closed, most employees will end up being covered by the FMLA mandate as well. So if there are existing employees not laid off, you do have to cover up to $200 a day for 2/3 of the employee's usual rate of pay, up to $10,000 per employee. The first 10 days can be paid by emergency paid sick leave if that is applicable to their scenario. So each employer scenario, we need to walk through them. But obviously, you can't retaliate against somebody who requests the FMLA leave under normal FMLA circumstances as well. And you can't demote somebody or ignore seniority. I don't think that's largely going to be the kind of issue we're going to see, but just be careful about it. Like I said, there are very, very, very few exceptions that have been provided. The interesting thing is that the Department of Labor wants people just to comply. So there won't be enforcement actions in the first 30 days after triggering it, because the whole goal here is to have good faith compliance. I accidentally removed a slide that talks about the tax credit. The short of it is every payment made under the paid sick leave and family medical leave emergency mandates is also a fully refundable credit for employers. So again, you can take the employee retention tax credit and then up to $12,000 per employee for what you have paid out for paid sick leave and FMLA. The reason why, again, from a policy standpoint, Congress, it makes a ton of sense, is we do not want businesses to be punished for providing that leave because they're sick or caring for sick people, or forced to stay at home because of the coronavirus and the broader emergency orders. But this is an often kind of hidden piece that many employers who are struggling to figure out their way through forget about this specific mandate, but also we're not aware that the tax credits cover all of your payments to employees, provided you have employees, not just yourself. Tax filing, you probably all already know this and are intensely aware of it, that for federal filings, July 15th is the new April 15th. So yesterday, you did not need to file federal taxes nor make payments for anything that was due on April 15th. I was quite surprised that while Minnesota has extended the individual income taxes deadline until July 15th, that the business, sole proprietor, LLC, and partnership and other related taxes were due yesterday on their normal timeline. I think it's a sign of how much the state budget is truly hurting, that the state really needs revenue and needs it now. I was quite frustrated and disappointed to see that those had not been delayed. But for the federal side, your next estimated payment, unless the IRS defers this action, you do have a federal estimated payment due June 15th. If you do not take a Paycheck Protection Program loan, you can also defer the employer portion of the FICA tax in 2020 and defer it half to 2021 and half to 2022. Of course, I would also do your math and substantiate your estimated taxes, because they may dramatically have changed. I'd be shocked if they have not dramatically changed. So leases, some of you may be landlords. Many of you are probably tenants. And you probably already had to deal with this with your April rent, although your landlords may have already offered to defer that April payment. Broadly, working with our real estate expert at Avisen and continuing to gather intelligence from the field, I think it's just really, really wise not to ignore these obligations, but to reach out to your landlords, talk about forgiveness of your rent or deferral of rent payments or any other alternative structure. Know, of course, that in most cases, many of you are going to be leasing from landlords that are also small businesses and smaller enterprises. And so just know that those landlords are stressed as well. And so it is really a values-based conversation or a values-based negotiation. If you have to shut down and have to think about changing the operation of your business, my caution is just always be careful about just walking away from that lease obligation. Happy to look at leases and help understand what the consequences may be and what your options may be. But I think throughout at this kind of general business to business, and of course business to consumer, but certainly business to business conversations, that I think now is the time as much as ever to participate in values-based conversations, not just transactional conversations. We're all stressed, we're all in the same boat together. So that's kind of the overall roadmap that I have right now in terms of assistance and help from the feds. And there are some state programs. There's a small business emergency loan program that a few of you might qualify for, though, although it's very, very limited, mostly to the restaurant and entertainment space. And there is a capital equipment loan guarantee program that the state ramped up in an emergency basis that could be quite useful. Very long or very low interest guaranteed loans by the state that banks for which banks will be the lender and a couple of other non-traditional banks may also come into play. So happy to talk about that as well. But I think that right now, the disaster loan and the Paycheck Protection Program or the retention tax credit are really where you should start your conversations. But don't ignore the paid sick leave and FMLA obligations and the tax benefits for meeting those obligations. And that is the end of the substance, and I'm happy to pause for questions, Jenny.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. That was super helpful to just lay it all out there, since we've heard so much in the news and just bombarded in our emails of what's available to small businesses. We did have a question about state versus federal, but I think you just answered that in the last few minutes, so thank you for that. Another question, kind of off topic, I mean, it's on topic, but maybe you can't speak to this, but given your political background, is there anything that small businesses or even Reuse Minnesota can do to lobby for some of our businesses, to reuse and donation businesses, to become essential businesses?
So I think I think this is really where values-based conversations really need to start, right? To say, we know that this is a global pandemic. We know that that we're very concerned about public health, and so we've been looking at, how could there are two issues here. One is the public health side. The other is a kind of justice argument. So from a message standpoint, saying we've been really looking at the protocols and procedures to quarantine incoming items. So the difference, the justice argument is if Home Depot and your neighborhood hardware store can stay open, why can't we? And for a number of reasons, that sort of fairness argument is pretty compelling. You want to be careful not to get lumped in with the just general, reopen everything, open it tomorrow, people are being hurt kind of argument that I think is falling on deaf ears, to be honest, because I think that, or it's not a compelling argument, I should say,
right.
Because it doesn't recognize the public health crisis. My wife is a physician, and I hear every single day what's happening in the hospitals, and certainly have seen very healthy people go immediately to sick and die. In my extended network of friends and family, we've lost people or had people on the verge of real crisis. So I think understanding and communicating the public health urgency and how you're ready and prepared to reopen with protocols that make sense, quarantining incoming items. That's the difference, of course, between secondhand reuse supply chain and the new supply chain of a lumberyard, for instance, is they can show custody throughout that supply chain of custody, whereas you have to be really careful about disinfecting and quarantining items before they're put back to sale. And so I think saying we're ready to reopen, we've got these protocols set up, here's some best practices we've learned from around the country, or here's what we've learned from the CDC or other guidance. And I think that message of justice and balancing the public health will be really relevant or really persuasive. Then the targets of that conversation, I certainly think that your state legislators are one of the starting channels, and turn them into your champions. So your state representative and state senator for your business first. Their job is to serve constituents. Their staff is also set up to be a point of intake on that conversation. And then the governor's office, like I said, I can't remember what the governor's, what the email is. Jenny, you may know it, and if not, we can follow it up, but a dedicated intake for those inquiries. And I just always think that starting with empathy for the challenges and the challenging considerations, not just saying like, I'm special, open up, dang it, but actually, yeah. Here's the reason why we should be treated slightly, or we should be treated consistent with everything that you're doing, and why it's in the state's interest to allow us to open up. And maybe it's working with the PCA or or a Department of Health liaison to another state agency or to the local household hazardous waste at the counties to kind of provide that oversight and say we're willing to abide by these standards, but we really think that people are ready to have us open and be a source of material and a source of getting things out of their house, and a lot of other options that I think, but nothing. I would just say as an elected official myself, and who continues to work with a past elected official and continues to work with legislators, anything that feels like it is going to put some friction into that river of public health and containment of this virus is going to be not well heard. So be sure that it's all within the context of managing the response and containing and flattening that curve of this horrible virus.
Completely makes sense. That's what we've been struggling with too, is we have a different supply chain for sure.
Exactly.
Another question, a few more questions came in. Can small business owners apply for unemployment comp?
So yes, you can, and you should. That's the guidance that DEED Commissioner Steve Grove has been giving, and our guidance as well at Avisen is as long as you're telling the truth about the economic injury you've sustained, let someone else tell you don't deserve the benefit. So go ahead and apply, and pretty straightforward. I was just working with a professional who's a partner, a small amount, but they're all partners in their professional practice, and they have been forced to work but not getting paychecks, and their overall leadership said you should be applying for unemployment yourself, which I was kind of surprised at. So, and they were approved for benefit, just haven't gotten approved for the first payment, but expect that paperwork to get done as well. So reach out to me if you have any questions. We have a phenomenal, very experienced employment lawyer with more than 30 years of experience in the space at our firm. And I think most of this we can handle in the 10 or 15 minutes that it takes to straighten out your situation or understand it, and just a pro bono service we're providing to folks.
Great, thank you for that. You might be able to answer this. Can we rearrange the inside of our businesses as we're not open to the public?
So I think the short answer is yes. I would not return to full staffing, of course, but if you're a small enterprise, there's specific language in Executive Order 20-33 towards the end of the critical sectors. And I don't have it open in front of me. I should have a printout sitting on my desk because it's kind of the Bible these days. But I believe there is sort of maintenance of the business and a couple of other kind of critical essential pieces. I wouldn't show up and do the work every day on a 9-to-5 basis. If it's, if you have your administrative tasks and other things, I would stay at home and do those. But if you need to go in and check on your business, make sure that the facility itself is in okay shape. You don't have any flooding or any other break-ins, et cetera. And then I think you can certainly do some work just on the setup side of the business. I'd be really surprised if that's not the case. I would be, the caution, of course, is we could have a snapback any day of cases. I just saw that we're above 100 ICU patients now in the state that have the coronavirus and have the COVID infection. And we could see a snapback of greater vigilance and a directive overnight to law enforcement to be more vigilant, in enforcing the stay-at-home order. And law enforcement's not going, it's all education, very, very, very few tickets. I've not seen a standalone citation for violating the stay-at-home order in Minnesota yet. But you just don't want to have police or a sheriff see that there's a lot of sudden activity at your facility and go, hey, what are you actually doing here? Are you really supposed to be open? Just don't invite the trouble. So do it within reason, but I don't see any reason why you can't do that business work on the inside, provided it's just not every single day, and certainly don't return to full staffing or anything else.
Got it. Okay. can you rehire an employee if there is a workers' comp risk if they get COVID?
Well, I think that's a perfect question for my colleague, Bill Egan. As I am not a work comp expert, I'm seeing the question here and I'm a visual learner, so I'm pondering it while I'm rereading it. So rehire an employee. So I'm assuming that means that the employee's been hired back. If there's a workers' comp risk, if they get COVID, I mean, I guess I'm not going to opine where I don't have. Shoot me an email. The questioner can shoot me an email, and I can forward that over to Bill and ask him to give you a call and work through it a little bit about your specific circumstances. In general, things like unemployment insurance. I know the question was about work comp, but in general, across the board, provided that you're not. If you're not providing any PPEs to employees, you're asking them to continue to come to work in violation of an order and that sort of stuff, you're going to have some liability. If you're following CDC and state guidelines, you're complying with the law, and somebody still gets the virus, it's going to be, it's very, very hard. We have community contagion. It's very hard to place where they would have gotten the virus, gotten the infection. And I think, so in terms of like attributing it to a workplace injury, I have not seen any of this outside of the healthcare field and others. Generally, I have not seen this discussion. And I think broadly, there's great latitude and, from workers' comp to unemployment, everything else, to saying it is a pandemic virus that is potent and has a virology that unlike anything we've seen in the loose in 100 years. And I would just be shocked if work comp becomes that much of an issue, but shoot me an email. I'll pass it along to Bill and ask him to give you a call.
Sounds good. Another question came in. All right, if businesses that file as subchapter S corporations can take the employee retention tax credit. Do you see that question?
Yes, I see it.
Okay.
Yes.
I probably said it wrong.
Yeah, no, you got it. Short answer, yes. You can take the employee retention tax credit. Give me a shout. Shoot me an email with any specifics. I'm happy to walk through it to see if I've missed something or if there's anything unique about your circumstance. But absolutely, there's no reason why you can't.
Great. Okay, I think we got all of the questions answered.
Great.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We have recorded this webinar, and we'll be posting it on our reusemn.org webpage under webinars, and we'll be sharing it out with Jeremy's slides. So thank you so much, Jeremy, for coming in. I know you're very busy. We really appreciate your time.
I'm happy to do it. Thanks for the invitation. And if folks do have questions, I'm serious about the offer to give 10 or 15 minutes of time that's needed just to help reassure you about where things sit. If you have a more complex scenario, we can absolutely meet your needs and figure out what you truly need at a cost-effective rate structure for now. And I know that it's a really distressing and challenging time personally for all of us. I know as a former small business owner myself, when I decided to wind down my business a few years ago, the very first thing I did was to make sure that my team was landing on their feet where they needed to land and wanted to land. And I know that the health and safety and welfare of your employees is top of mind as well. And so, and then of course, managing your own operations and your own businesses on top of that too, for your own financial well-being. And so just wish you all to take care of yourselves, keep plugging. Let me know if I can help you. Of course, let the Reuse team know what they can do as well, and happy to be of service.
Thanks, Jeremy, and thanks everyone for participating. Stay tuned for more webinars coming up in the next few weeks about engaging your customers while you're closed, and some of those things we talked about today, like supply chain and best practices for keeping everyone healthy and safe. Stay well, everybody. Goodbye.